So thank you all again for coming and spending time with us today. This is the fourth in a series of COVID-19 related webinars that have come out of the Migrant Health and Housing Work Group, which includes the North Carolina Agri-Medicine Institute, North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, the Farm Worker Health Program, the North Carolina Community Health Center Association, and we have others join us from time to time. And so this webinar came as a result of our realizing that there were health professionals and other outreach staff who might be visiting farms for the first time, or maybe they had visited farms before but just didn't have knowledge of cooperative extension or of the rules that farms have to follow relative to food safety and animal biosecurity. And so we know that extension plays a very key role in serving as a liaison between, or can serve as a liaison between health providers and farms and helping understand more about what's going on in agriculture out in the counties. So very graciously, we have our three presenters today. Our first presenter is going to be Dr. Rich Bonanno, and the nice thing about Dr. Bonanno is not only is he the director of the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service and Associate Dean for the College of Ag Life Science at NC State, but he's also a farmer, and that gives him a very unique perspective in his position that we appreciate. Our second presenter today will be Dr. Chip Simmons, who is an area specialized agent in food safety and fresh produce, and he primarily serves the eastern half of the state. And then finally, we'll wrap up today with Richard Goforth, who's an area specialized agent in poultry, and Richard is down in the south central part of the state. So with that, Dr. Bonanno, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Chip has just emailed me and said for some reason the meeting is locked. He's getting the meeting is locked message, which I see on the top right-hand side of the screen. So you might need to unlock to let him on. So, okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Rich Bonanno, and I work at NC State, and I am in charge of the extension system here in North Carolina. And I just wanted to give you a little idea of what we do and how our operation works. We are part of the land grant system in North Carolina. We have two land grant universities. We have NC State in Raleigh, which is an 1862 institution, as we call it, because that's where the funding originated from the federal government. And then we have an 1890 university, which is North Carolina A&T, which is one of the universities that is considered historically Black. And there are about 18 of these universities from the 1890s system that are part of the land grant mission. What makes the land grant universities different as a public university from a lot of other universities that have either teaching as their main focus or teaching and research as their main focus, we have a main focus of intentionally extending research-based information or other information out to the public. It's not something that we do on the side. It's actually part of how we hire people and how we move our university forward. If I can have the next slide. So we are an educational partnership, helping people put research-based knowledge to work for economic prosperity, environmental stewardship, and improved quality of life. We are educators. We are not regulators, but oftentimes we educate on things that are part of the regulatory process. So things that might have come originally out of research that end up in legislation become part of regulation. Farmers have to work with them or deal with them. They could be pesticide related, they could be food related, food safety related, they could be animal related. And so that's part of the education that we do around the state. Next slide, please. We call it cooperative extension because the cooperative is not that we just get along with people, but we have various funding sources that cooperate together to provide what we do. We start off with federal government, federal money that comes from USDA NIFA, which is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. There is money that goes to each of the land-grant universities for both research and extension. There's a formula based on every state gets something different. North Carolina, believe it or not, gets the second highest amount in the whole country. One of the criteria is the percentage of the population that lives in rural communities, which is one of the criteria, and that's why we do so well compared to states like Indiana or Illinois. We think they would have more agriculture and would do more. There is a huge state component. States are required to match the federal money at least 1-to-1, and working within the land-grant universities that have academic research and extension. But in our case, the focus is our extension dollars that come in. And also we have a tremendous partnership with local government. So we have an office in every county. I think we can go to the next slide, Robin. Maybe that's where I've got the state. So we have an office in every county. We've got the state divided into 5 districts. We got a district director for every district. We have an office in every county, plus the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And those offices, 99 of those 101 offices are actually owned by county government. And on average, counties pay 54% of all the people that we have working out in the county. So we've got a little over 1,000 people that work for us in extension. And more than 2/3 of those people are out in the counties, and the other third are on our college campuses, working as subject matter experts for the people that are out in the counties. Next slide. What we pride ourselves on doing in most of our areas are that we try to work with the public, whether they're farmers, whether they're youth with 4-H, whether they're families with food and nutrition, health-related programs that we do that are geared towards food safety and nutrition. We try to identify what the needs are out in the community, realizing that we have researchers back on our campus that can come up with information that we need to solve problems. Sometimes we already have that information from prior years or prior days, but sometimes we have to develop that research-based information. So it's very grassroots. Understand the needs of the community, work to develop solutions, and then transfer that research-based information back to the user community. Next slide. And as I might have just mentioned, we have 3 main core areas. Agriculture, which covers plant and animal agriculture, home horticulture, ornamentals, row crops, horticultural crops, vegetables, fruits, and so forth, animal production across the board. Our food and nutrition programs, which are largely geared towards food safety and for people making better food choices in their diets, and then 4-H and youth development, which is largely focused on citizenship and leadership with youth that range from basically age 5 through age 18. Next slide. How we educate. The top picture is a picture that it's very, very old. The land-grant universities, as I mentioned, in the case of NC State, 1862. It was about 1880s before the research component came into those universities. And it was in the early 1900s, 1914, when the extension component came in. So you see a very old picture. I'm trying to see what that field is of, and it may be, well, I'm not sure what that is. It looks pretty tall, so it could be corn, but I'm getting a sense that it might be cotton as well. And then the bottom picture is small grains, actually wheat, a field day about 2 years ago out in Union County, where our researchers are putting out plots, looking at varieties, fertility practices, pest management, and so forth. And we have field days where farmers come out and we talk to them about what we're doing and how it can work for them. So we have agents in all the counties. We have our specialists on campus that provide subject matter information back to our agents. But we also have areas where we don't expect all of our agents to have that expertise. Things like aquaculture, food safety are a couple of examples where, and dairy is another one, where we rely on area specialized agents, and the two people that will be speaking to you soon are both area specialized agents. They work in large areas of the state. Usually we have 3 or 4 that will deal with the entire state. And they work, again, on areas where it's either, there's a lot of regulatory pieces that come into place, as in what you're going to hear in a few minutes, or they're in an area where we just don't expect our agents to have a lot of expertise. If I can have the next slide. And this is just a little summary of what we do. We've got 101 centers. We do over 13,000 educational programs per year. We've got an incredible web presence with a lot of hits, a lot of face-to-face contacts. We have a $2.1 billion economic impact on the state of North Carolina. And that's pretty much what Extension's all about. I thought I would throw in just something, personal here. We have a farm, a family farm in Massachusetts, about 30 miles north of Boston. Been in the family since 1910. Originally was all family, then a lot of local people. But in the last few years, our workforce is primarily H-2A. And up in New England, our H-2A workers are not coming from Mexico, believe it or not, they're coming from Jamaica. And we've been in that program for about 30 years. I think 1989 was the first, or 1990 was the first year I was in that program. So this may be the 31st year. We're also in the J-1 visa program, where we bring students or people that have just graduated from college that have a degree in agriculture. They're in a paid internship program. Housing is provided and all of that, pay, transportation in many cases. And it's interesting. We try to work with our family. We try to work with local help, and we're in these 2 programs. And we just had a little interesting incident the other day because we're very concerned about who comes on the farm to make sure that there's protocols. And I think many of you can appreciate that, because even though a lot of you might not think of a farm as this, sort of entity that has to be protected, sometimes when I think about things like hospitals, there are a lot of things people do at home, but when you get to a facility that has a lot of rules and regulations, you better be following them. Otherwise, there can be things that go wrong. But we just had a J-1 visa student arrive to the farm about 3 weeks ago. And we have housing for the interns, who are usually female, and housing for the H-2A workers that are usually male. But in this case, this was a male J-1 visa person coming. And we said, well, we've got extra space with the H-2A workers. There's a couple of extra beds in there. They can bunk with the H-2A workers. And our H-2A workers said, no. You are not going to take this person that's just come from a farm in Michigan and bring them to our housing unless you quarantine them in your own house or someplace else for 2 weeks. The guys are very, very concerned about COVID and everything going on. And so besides all the other rules and regulations we have to follow, COVID has put a whole new slant on how our workers think and operate and live on the farm, and to make sure that they have that kind of safety. So when my daughter called me, who runs the farm, I said, Heather, you've just got to be respectful of the wishes of everybody here. You've got a lot to protect. You've got a business to run. You've got a lot of rules and regulations you have to follow. And you have a lot of people that are concerned about their health and safety. So you got to put all that together when you make these decisions. So with that, Robin, I think I'm done. I've said plenty, and we'll turn it over to our subject matter experts to have a little more expertise.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bonanno, and we hope that you can stay with us for a little bit in case anyone gives us some questions. Yep. So thank you. All right, and Chip, if you'll give me just a second, we will get you started. All right. All right, Chip, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, go right ahead and just let me know when I need to advance for you.
Well, thanks so much for having me today. I'm an area specialized agent focusing on fresh produce and food safety. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what we do here in Extension and how we try to educate our growers. Next slide, please. So agriculture really is our #1 industry. The latest numbers that came out just recently said that it was a $91.8 billion industry, and we're ranked 8th overall in the U.S. for total cash receipts. If you look down at our ranking, you can see that tobacco, flue-cured tobacco, and sweet potatoes we're all ranked #1 in the United States, followed up by being #2 in poultry and hogs and turkeys, #3 in strawberries, #4 in cucumbers and cantaloupes. And one of the things that I'd hoped to, reason I bring those numbers up is because oftentimes in those industries, they're fairly labor intensive. And because of that, you know, we have a pretty large population of H2A workers here, and there's a lot of security that needs to go along with that. Next slide, please. So a little bit about on-farm food safety. Really, all of this is based on the underlying principles of good agricultural practices. And the growers, from a grower's perspective, they have 2 different lines. Most all farms are going to fall under the legal requirements and will be subject to inspection for those under the Food Safety Modernization Act. And many of these larger farms actually rely on or are required to have a third-party audit. And these are required by the buyer. Next slide, please. So when we compare those, farm audits really have been in place for 15 or more years. These tend to be optional, and they're really driven by the buyer. They're offered by third-party auditing companies. They tend to be relatively expensive here in North Carolina. On average, per commodity, they're anywhere from about $1,200 to $1,500 or more, depending upon which scheme that they're audited under. And they're really driven by a food safety plan. The Food Safety Modernization Act is relatively new. It was signed into legislation in 2011. It's a government regulation, and this is mandatory for all covered farms. And instead of it being administered by a auditing company, it's really administered by North Carolina Department of Agriculture here within the state under FDA's guidance. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Food Safety Modernization Act. Again, it was signed into law in 2011. It had tiered compliance for different farm sizes. Those farms over 500,000 should be compliant in 2018. From 250 to 500,000 should have been compliant in 2019. And then the smaller farms from 250 to down to 25,000 should have been compliant in January 2020. The idea behind this was really to revamp the entire food safety system and focus on prevention of outbreaks rather than being a reactive type system. And it also created an integrated food safety system, a partnership between the federal government, state government, and local authorities. Next slide, please. So under the Food Safety Modernization Act, there were 7 different rules that focused on different parts of the food system. The one that I'd like to talk about today is the Produce Safety Rule, which really focuses on setting a federal regulatory standard or framework based on the production, the harvest, and handling of fruits and vegetables, with a focus of trying to reduce microbial contamination and microbial foodborne illnesses. The idea behind this is that it should be science-based and risk-based, and should consider all practices and different commodities that you might expect on a produce farm. Next slide, please. So the actual rule is in the Code of Federal Register 21 CFR Part 112. The title, Standards for the Growing, Harvesting, Packing, and Holding of Produce for Human Consumption. And in that document, part of what I'd like to discuss today or focus on today are visitors and visitor policy. So within that document, it defines a visitor as any person other than the personnel who might enter a covered farm with your permission. In 112.22, it lays out the minimum requirements for training personnel, and within that section A2, the importance of health and personal hygiene for all personnel and visitors, including recognizing symptoms of health conditions that are reasonably likely to result in contamination of covered produce or food contact surfaces with microorganisms of public health significance. Next slide, please. It further goes on in 112.33 to talk about visitors and what measures you might take to prevent visitors actually contaminating covered produce. So in Part A of that, you must make visitors aware of policies and procedures that you have on your farm to protect covered produce and food contact surfaces, and try to do anything reasonably necessary to ensure that visitors comply with those policies. And you must make toilet and hand washing facilities available to visitors. So these really were the sections within that rule that outlined the legal responsibilities of a farm for how they should deal with or how they should work with visitors that might come there. Next slide, please. So switching gears just a little bit, so what I've talked about so far are really the legal requirements and those that are mandatory on all farms that are covered by the produce safety rule. In this section, I'd like to talk a little bit about those buyer requirements. And so more and more, many of our farms would fall under the USDA harmonized GAP food safety standard. And that's really just a standard, a third-party audit that buyers are requiring. So a large buyer like, say, Harris Teeter, Walmart, so on and so forth would say, in order for us to buy your product, you need to demonstrate to us that you have some food safety practices in place on the farm. And these audits are done by a third party, so a third party non-biased party. Next slide, please. So within the Harmonized GAP program, it's broken down into several sections. In the general section 10.2, it says employees and visitors shall be made aware of and follow all personal hygiene practices as designated by the operation. And what you can see here are the different procedures and what an auditor would need to observe for verification of that. Next slide, please. It goes on to further say in section 10.4 that toilet facilities shall be of adequate number, easily accessible to employees and visitors, and in compliance with applicable regulations. And again, what procedures must be there and what the auditor would need to verify. One other thing that I'll point out is there several other columns, and this is the actual standard that it goes by. And the DOC column basically outlines what type of documentation that a farm would need. And the MAN column is designates the different sections as mandatory. So if this were missing from a farm, it would be an automatic failure of the gap audit. And with the failure of the gap audit, those buyers would not be willing to buy from them. Next slide, please. In the general section 10.18, workers and visitors who show signs of illness shall be restricted from direct contact with produce or food contact surfaces. This requires a written protocol, written procedures, and again, mandatory. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I have done to help better educate, better inform our growers is I've actually gone through a USDA auditor course. And this is some guidance that was provided in the auditor manual. So this is the training that an auditor would get. And basically what it says as you go through here, and I'm not going to read all this, in the second paragraph here, the operation must demonstrate reasonable effort to instruct visitors on personal hygiene practices. For example, the operation may require visitors to check in and enter the premises through the office. They may post signs in the field stating all visitors must check in at the office prior to coming onto the property. And some may actually require that visitors sign in before entering, so that they can keep track of who is on the property, and if they do have issues with food safety, they could try to backtrack to find out what happened. Next slide, please. So these are some of the farm policies that you might encounter during a visit. Certainly check in or sign in at the office. I would say most farms are going to require that. They may require you to park in a designated area. They certainly would require some form of identification so that they could put that down as you sign in. They may possibly require that you sign a liability waiver. Many of them will require that you be accompanied while on the farm, particularly if the visitor is the farms that we work with require that you wash your hands before entering the farm. They may observe your clothing or your shoes for any signs of microbial contamination. They generally do not allow pictures or videos, particularly if the farm is what's termed a mixed type facility. So if they do any type of processing, if they do any type of cutting, chopping, or any type of processing, they may have a no jewelry policy. So they would require no jewelry other than a plain wedding band with no stones. And certainly this would include cell phones or other items that may present a physical hazard. So they don't want anything that might fall out of your pocket or fall off into, say, a bag of chopped lettuce or chopped cabbage. Again, for processing facilities, they may require that you wear hairnets, booties, gloves, or other personal protection equipment. And then this year, really specific for COVID-19, many may require that your temperature be taken and require that you have a face covering. You know, this year has been a very unusual year with COVID-19, and many of the farms are taking precautions such as, you know, in addition to having to sign in and check in, you know, they keep their workers isolated. So they may have a U-pick operation as well as the regular commercial operation. They would keep those areas separate so that the workers wouldn't come into contact with, with the public. They may even go so far as to for their workers to order their food in and things like that to prevent them from being exposed. So in many instances, they really look toward their employees as being family. Here in the chat box, can the presenter clarify that visitor to the farm does not mean visitor to a labor camp? This would really, if the housing on the property is on the farm, then a visitor would fall under a lot of these policies. So next slide, please. So in trying to help with the education of folks and trying to help them meet these requirements, we've come up with a couple of resources that are available through North Carolina State. These are available at our website, ncfreshproducesafety.ces.ncsu.edu. And we have this signage both in English and Spanish. The things we tried to focus on, visitors are only allowed in growing and packing areas when they're accompanied by an employee or with prior permission from the owner. It asks that visitors follow all food safety policies posted, and ask that toilets and hand washing be available for use, and follow all the hand washing guidelines that are posted. Next slide, please. And that's it. So I'll try to follow up and answer questions at the end. Here we'll turn it over to Richard. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chip. And do remember to continue to type your questions in the chat box, so we should have some time at the end for our speakers.
All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Goforth. I am one of the area specialized agents. I work with poultry primarily, and I cover the south central part of North Carolina. I want to talk to you a little bit about biosecurity practices on our poultry and livestock operations, primarily focusing on poultry and hog operations in North Carolina. Those are our two integrated species where we have more of a larger farms, and biosecurity is practiced a little more intensely than they are on other operations because of their integration and networking with the integrators and companies that they produce poultry and livestock for. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to break down what is biosecurity. Well, it's any actions that can intentionally taken to prevent the spread of disease and disease-causing organisms. And got some examples here. And if you look over these examples, you'll see that a lot of these things are things that we've all been practicing for several months now to deal with the COVID-19 or coronavirus. So these are the same practices that we're using currently to prevent that spread, that we often use many of these same techniques to prevent the spread of diseases to our flocks and to our herds and back to us as well. Next slide, please. So why do we practice biosecurity? Well, for several reasons. One is it's good for our animal welfare. People want to be concerned about animals and how they're taken care of. So keeping them free of disease and sickness is one of the 5 freedoms that's the basis of all good animal welfare. It's good for human welfare as well. Obviously, we have some diseases like the coronavirus now that sometimes zoonotic diseases do transfer to humans, or there's a component of that, and we want to make sure that we're eliminating and reducing the risk for that as much as possible. Talked about this a little bit, but to protect the farmer's investment, when you look at these larger livestock operations, poultry and swine specifically, most of them are going to have at least $1 million invested in their buildings alone. When you see a typical poultry house in North Carolina, each one of those houses is going to be it's going to cost that farmer about $250,000 to build and to stock it with all the equipment required to operate it. And then as several of the speakers have already mentioned, we want to protect our North Carolina's economy because agriculture is our largest industry. It supports a huge portion of our economy, and the livestock and poultry sector of that ag economy is responsible for over 68% of that. And then also, of course, we want to protect our nation's food supplies. We saw during the early stages of the coronavirus outbreak that our food supply can be disrupted quite quickly by diseases, and that could be whether it's such as corona, or it could be if there was a actual outbreak of other animal and livestock diseases as well that could play a role in that. So North Carolina is the second largest producer of poultry products in the U.S., and we have the third most diverse ag economy with over 80 different large crops being produced. So it's important that we practice good biosecurity to protect all of these things. Next slide, please. So biosecurity is important to understand that it involves everyone. So much like the slogan now, with coronavirus, that we're all in this together. Well, when it comes to biosecurity on the farm, there's a lot of people involved, and we are all in it together. So it's important for the cases of poultry, especially our backyard and small flocks, or with swine, our small herds, and growers that have just even a few animals. It's important that they understand biosecurity principles. It's important they understand to recognize disease symptoms, and that they know and seek out proper treatments and care when they have issues to keep it spreading to our larger commercial industry. It involves veterinarians, just like with health, it involves doctors, and doctors should be included probably here on this slide as well. That health with our veterinarians for animals and human doctors together, they can a lot of times they can see diseases together, and they need to work. And there's a lot of thought now going out to One Health, and that's a big push to try to integrate One Health, realize that animal and human diseases can sometimes mix, and that sometimes the health of animals and as well as people affect both groups. And then, of course, industry, the growers themselves, the processors, all the people that work in the related livestock sectors, they have a huge role. They're dealing with it day to day, boots on the ground. And then, of course, government agencies like the USDA and NCDA, they're out there trying to prevent those diseases coming in from other places, other countries. They're dealing with when we do have outbreaks of communicable diseases and things that are reportable, like avian influenza. They're help to monitor those diseases and help us figure out how to control them and prevent that spread even further. Next slide, please. So when you do go to a farm, just come up with a few things that you do want to be prepared for on a farm visit. A lot of them are things that Chip just discussed and went over. But you do want to arrive at the agreed upon time. And on a farm, especially on a livestock farm, things don't always go to plan. So don't be surprised if you end up waiting a little bit. Sometimes equipment breaks down, animals get sick, things change very quickly, and they need to be responded to very quickly. So the farmer may get tied up and not be able to meet you exactly when he initially agreed to, but be patient. Be ready to answer screening questions. Chip alluded to a lot of these. You need to talk about. They're going to ask you, where have you been? Have you traveled outside the country in the last 72 hours? Have you been around other livestock? So be prepared to answer some of those questions that they need to know in order to make sure you're going to meet their biosecurity protocols. You should be prepared to wear the PPE. It's very common on livestock operations to wear shoe covers, disposable coveralls, gloves, hair bonnets, respirators. So be prepared to either provide your own and or wear what they require and may provide for you. I think Chip talked about parking in designated area. In a lot of cases on our livestock farms, you're going to need to either walk onto the farm, parking outside the gate, or you're going to need to ride with the guest. And if your vehicle is allowed on the farm, be prepared that it will likely be disinfected. That could be power washing of the tires and undercarriage. It may mean spraying with some disinfectant chemicals to treat the tires and undercarriage to make sure that it's not bringing on any soil or manure that may contain disease-causing organisms. Typically, like Chip mentioned, we don't do a lot of pictures or photos or video, but if you do have a reasonable cause to want to take that or need that, you need to make sure you ask and get permission. In many cases, if there's a good reason for you to have a picture or a video, they will accommodate you. They just, don't typically want themselves or workers or other farm identifying information in those photos or videos. Do also remember, in case of many of our integrated livestock operations, the animals themselves technically belong to the company they're growing for. So sometimes the farmer may not be able to give permission because if you're taking pictures of those animals, because they don't technically belong to him, and he would have to get permission from his company that he grows for as well. Do expect there to be odors and dust and noise. Farms are busy places, especially livestock operations. There's going to be smells that come with those animals. So you do have to be aware that those are going to be there and be prepared to deal with them. Extreme weather conditions is very important too. When you're wearing the PPE on a hot summer day like it is right now, there's a limited amount of time that you can be in that safely. You also need to be prepared for that temperature. So you want to dress appropriately, knowing if you're going to have to wear disposable coveralls, gloves, respirators, etc. That's going to increase the temperature for you, and you need to be physically capable of sustaining that. So it's important for you to hydrate on a hot day before you go to the farm as well, and that you are in a good health that you can withstand that. Many of our livestock operations, especially if you go to a breeder, what we call a parent or grandparent stock operation, you will be asked to actually shower in and out of those facilities. So just like Chip mentioned, visitors are expected to follow the same protocols that the employees have to follow on the farm. So if there are shower in and shower out facilities, you should expect to follow that protocol as well. And finally, whenever you visit a livestock farm, before you visit another farm or before you go home to your own birds or other animals, you need to make sure that you shower and change your clothes and shoes before you make that next visit. Next slide, please. So here's some of the don'ts. Obviously, we don't want to touch the animals or kiss them. So keep that in mind. There could be exceptions here, but you need to certainly ask. But generally, the rule, you don't want to be touching the animals. That's a no-no. As Chip mentioned, in those operations, a lot of them, they were required to have restroom facilities. And while the farms will have restroom facilities for their workers, they're smaller. Typically, some of these may be in locations that are not easily accessible to visitors. It often may be outside the clean or dirty line again, where you would have to go back through the biosecurity entry procedure in order to get to these facilities. So it would be best if you could try to avoid the need for them when you're on farms, livestock farms especially. You shouldn't visit multiple farms in one day. Ideally, we like to have at least 72 hours before you have any contact with a related species or from travel overseas out of the country. Obviously, again, you should not wander off and enter areas alone. You don't know what's on the farm or what hidden hazards there may be there. You shouldn't wear open-toed shoes. That's another no-no. Just a general safety precaution that needs to be kept in mind. And then, don't be afraid to ask questions. Most of our farmers and growers, they're very happy to tell their story. They relish the opportunity to explain why they do what they do and how they do it the way they do it. That's part of our message that we want to get out there to help consumers and people understand. So when they do have these rare chances to meet people that maybe are not familiar with livestock operations, they're usually very happy to answer your questions for the most part. Next slide, please. So as Chip mentioned, notification is essential and often it's required. While there are not regulations like FSMA that require a lot of these things with the visitors, the logs and some of that information is required, as Chip mentioned, with a lot of their third-party audits. Again, a lot of the major producers or users like McDonald's or Walmart's, they have these farms audited by third parties, and they need to make sure that the animals are raised humanely, that their welfare standards and their safety standards are being met. So the notification to the farm ahead of time to let them know you're coming helps them prepare for you. They want to make sure, have you had contact with other animals? They want to make sure, are you currently sick, or do you have other limitations? If you have a condition that would not allow you to wear a respirator or PPE during a hot 90-degree day, that means you would not really be able to visit that farm. You would have to find someone else from your office or organization to make that trip, or do it at a different time. They need to alert you to potential hazards on the farm. They need to know you're there because farming is a dangerous occupation, and there are lots of hazards, especially to people that are not familiar with them. So they need to be able to let you know what's going on and where the danger spots are. Again, they want to make sure that your visit is valid. They're going to want to see some identification. They're wanting to know why you're making the visit. That's not saying that they're preventing it, but they need some validation of why you're visiting and what your goals are. Livestock industry, especially more so than other farming, is under scrutiny from a lot of groups that don't agree with livestock or animal production for food. Some disagree because of the welfare or how we do it. Some disagree on the principle of using animals for food altogether. So we do need to make sure that the right people are getting on and that those people have a valid reason for entering our livestock operations. It's also important for them to know because they have to coordinate with deliveries. There are a lot of action coming onto a farm for our livestock operations. There's deliveries of food, deliveries of animals leaving the farm, gas, propane, lots of other deliveries coming on and off the farm. So they need to coordinate those activities so that everyone can make their deliveries. They can deliver animals. They can send animals off to the processing facilities in a safe, effective manner. In many cases, if you were to want to visit a farm, like a poultry farm, on the day that they're selling out and the birds are going to market, there are going to be a large number of large trucks coming in and out. There's going to be extra people on the farm with the catching crews already. There's lots of basically forklifts running in and out of the houses, moving at quick paces. So that's a particularly dangerous time to have extra visitors on the farm. So they would probably want you to avoid those days if possible. If you would have a valid reason to be there on that day, you could. The other thing is, once the farm sells its animals and they're going to market, most farms are going to have 7 to 10 days at least of downtime where they're not going to have animals present on the farm or a reduced number, which greatly reduces the biosecurity risk of having visitors. So making your visit, if you need to make a visit to the farm and it could wait a day or two for them to sell that flock or that herd, and then you could come in and visit, it's going to reduce their workload and greatly reduce the risk of your visit to the farm for biosecurity purposes. Again, as I mentioned, they need to create a record for tracing. If there was an outbreak of disease, they need to be able to trace that back and for your health, as well as the tracing the cause of the disease for the animal health. And in many cases, the third-party auditing groups, again, require visitor logs. Also, as I mentioned, because these are integrated industries, many times they have to require these tracing logs and visitor logs from the companies they grow for. And finally, again, they need to make sure that they have all the PPE that you're going to need is available and that you're actually using it. So much like Chip mentioned with the rule of visitors are expected to follow the same protocols, well, if farm workers are expected to wear shoes or boot covers or coveralls, etc., they're going to make sure that you have that same standard and that you have those what you need available for you for that visit. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick note of some our information here. So if you want to contact Cooperative Extension, you can go to that website. You can look for any of us. There's information on food safety here, as well as the Agrimedicine Institute. I think, let's see, are there any questions?
All right, thank you so much, Richard. And if anyone has any questions, we can take a look at those now.
So, Robin, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was just looking in the chat, and I am not the be all and end all of answering questions, but just think a little bit about some of the protocols here and what people are saying that they normally do or don't do. I would, I think everybody understands that sometimes employees may not be as concerned about following the rules that they're supposed to be following as maybe the person running the business. I see the comments about labor camps, and I think there's not an intention here to restrict people from labor camps, but the question is that is there a protocol for going and visiting that needs to be followed and checking in? Just think of everything going on right now. We're so concerned about COVID and contact tracing. So being able to document who comes in, who goes out in case somebody does get sick. If your workers are sick and infect somebody coming onto the farm, we need to be worried about that. Workers on the side of the field at lunchtime, maybe at lunch, but they are still possibly on the farm. And are we breaking any protocols there that could be, important? Just think about that. I mean, you sneak into the hospital and go visit your son or your daughter. If the hospital has a protocol that you can't be in there, farms could have similar protocols, and sometimes, just looking for an opportune time to go visit growers, you may be violating, some protocols that these employees need to follow. So just keep that all in mind. This issue about field sanitation, the issue about not visiting more than one farm in the same day if there's animals, these are all real issues that farmers have to deal with. And as I mentioned, you can't expect the employees to be the enforcers of this, but I would ask that you at least respect that you're going to a place of business. The workers may be at that place of business physically, even though they could be on the edge of the field. And what are the protocols for being on somebody else's property at a place of business? The other thing that I do not know the answer to, but I'm throwing it out here because someone may be able to answer it. If you've got group housing, and a lot of times H2A is housing, what is the protocol if someone says, so you've got 10 people in the house, one person or two people say, sure, come in and talk to us. But the other people say, no, 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 we don't want anybody in the house right now because of COVID. Where's the line? I don't know the answer to that question, but it just came across that that may be an issue that could come up. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bonanno. And I think you make a good point. The point is not that there are no visitors. The point is that there are rules for visitors. And we just need to be respectful and have an open knowledge of what all the requirements are. At a different time, we're probably going to do another webinar more geared toward migrant housing and rules that are related to that and workers. But I think you make a good point that we are just trying to raise the awareness of all the things that have to be considered that folks might have not known, that, you know, you shouldn't visit more than one farm that has livestock in a day. I mean, I've spent my fair amount of time with our poultry agents and with growers, and the growers do not even socialize among themselves in town because of fear of passing disease from one to another. The thing about the field sanitation, that's a Department of Labor issue, and Beth is on vacation today. She is not available. But anytime there is an issue around field sanitation, that is for the Agricultural Safety and Health Bureau to address, and they, you know, are welcome your calls. And if anyone needs that information that doesn't have it, we're happy to share that.
And right quick, Robin, there was one other point I think I forgot. It's important for people to think about the livestock you have at home. So if someone who wants to visit a farm has a small poultry flock at home, they have a pet parrot or parakeet, those are also potential risk for poultry operations, as well as someone who maybe has a small herd of hogs or is an avid wild boar hunter or hunts the feral pigs. Those are also other instances where people need to be restricted and they need to be careful with that they've followed good sanitation and not wearing shoes and clothing that they wear when doing those activities at home to any of these farms.
Great point, Richard. Just to kind of follow up with what Dr. Bonanno and Richard both have said, I was actually on a produce farm earlier this week, and it was a diversified farm. So they had produce as well as chickens. And the grower was worried about backyard flocks and people that might have backyard flocks actually coming to their produce stand and bringing something to the stand that they would then carry back to their chicken houses. So a lot of worries right now with growers and infectious diseases, and certainly with COVID-19, it's added a whole different dimension for the worries that growers have today and the risks that they may bring. In North Carolina, it's unfortunate, but we've actually had COVID-19 outbreaks with workers on farms, with tobacco farms, with produce farms, and it cripples those farms. It takes away the entire labor force for those farms, and it really cripples the farms. And when that's happened with the folks that I've talked to, the owners of the farms, because in many instances these workers have been coming back year after year for multiple years, sometimes decades, and they're like family to them, and they're very concerned for the health of their workers. So they not only have the health of their workers as a concern, but also their business and the risk that visitors may pose to that.
Thank you, Chip. I think we brought up some very interesting points, and I think there's going to be room for future conversation on this. And knowing extension as I do, and knowing my migrant health friends as I do, I am sure that we can work together to help clarify things that need more clarification and make sure that we are taking care of everyone who's on the farm and that we're ensuring the health and safety that's going to sustain that farm as a viable part of our agricultural economy going forward. So with that, unless there's any more burning questions, we will thank our speakers, and I will get this recording link out as soon as it's available, and we'll have it posted on the websites by the first of the week. So thank you all again. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.